session is called Asexuality Leadership Q&A. So hopefully you are here with your burning questions to ask some of us. I hope that is what will happen. We've also invited press to this session. Are there any members of the press here? No? Okay. So if members of the press do come in, we may have them ask questions as well, all right? This is a session for you to talk to the three of us and also to share new ideas to generate some new conversation. The three of us are far from the only leaders in the asexual community. We just agreed to do this panel. And so we'd like to, at the beginning to say that there are lots of other people that also do incredible and amazing work in the asexual community. We're just the ones on this particular panel. It's by no means complete. As I said in the introduction, my name is Sara Beth Brooks. I'm the founder of Asexual Awareness Week. This is our 5th year doing it. It will be October 26th to November 1st this year. So if you grab one of the flyers that are sitting in the back, they're little postcard sized with an ACE flag on them. If you can date, our website, and a little information. And then you can also on our website find many resources. We have one of the largest set of downloadable resources on the internet available for you. Brochures, pamphlets. Oh look, excellent. Somebody has handed you this. These are our postcards. I will apologize in advance for the typo on the back. When they came in, it was too late for me to be ordered. So if you grab one of these postcards, you'll then have our web address, as well as some information about Asexual Awareness Week on the back. We also call it ACE Week, which is something that came out of the community to call it ACE Week. I'm willing to talk about just about anything today, asexual leadership-wise. I'm hoping that you all have some questions. I'm going to turn it over to the lovely Ivy.
Hello. I am known as Ivy to my friends, these guys, all of you, hopefully. I also write professionally under my legal name, which is Sondra Decker. This is my book that is coming out in September. And, of course, lots of people know me online as swankivy. I make YouTube videos, and I complain a lot on my blog. On YouTube, sometimes I read my hate mail, which is also fun. And I have written this book partly because there's only been really 2 other books that have been about addressing what asexuality is and how it's relevant to everyone. One was a textbook. It was not written from an asexual perspective. It was Anthony Bogart's book, Understanding Asexuality. So it is a textbook, it is academic, and it is priced academically. And then a self-published book by Asexuality Archive is available. And the problem with self-published books is that they're usually excellent, but they are not as accessible from bookstores, and a lot of times with older generations especially, we find a problem with legitimacy. So I really wanted to get the content out there so that when these young people are coming out to their parents, the parents are going to go to the bookstore, they're going to find something rather than, oh, there's nothing on this, so it must not exist, and that contributes to the invisibility we already face. So this was released on September 2nd, and these are advanced reading copies. They're paperback. So the actual edition that is released in September is going to be hardcover. It should also be released in ebook at the same time. And we're talking about audio. And right now, today at this conference, I will be taking entries for a raffle to win one of these. It's unfinished and has a couple of mistakes in it, but it's the content. So if you want to enter to win one of these, you can see my table on the outside during tea and cake and during lunch. So I'll be out there. And other than that, that's what I'm doing here. Turn it over to David.
I can't see the title from here.
I can't believe I didn't mention my title. I'm just terrible at shelling. The invisible orientation.
Oh, that explains why I couldn't see it.
You win. Okay.
My name is David J. I'm the founder of asexuality.org. Before I start talking a little bit about what I've been up to and what I'm most excited about in terms of what's happening in the movement right now, I want to give some thanks. So I want to thank, we mentioned this a little bit at the beginning, but in case there are any people who confess or because it all bears saying again, I want to thank the Ryerson Student Union for this space that they've contributed to us. This is a fantastic area for us to be able to gather in. I want to give a huge thanks and invite a round of applause to Listen Up Canada. They're the ones who've helped to sponsor our ASL interpreters. And also to the AVEN community for crowdfunding the rest of the sponsorship for our for the ASL interpretation. Which this is the first year we've had interpretation at the conference, and I think that really kind of opens up what I want to talk about, which is that we are becoming much more inclusive as a community. We are making that inclusivity a priority in many, many ways. And that's something that I think our community has been working towards for a long time, and seeing that really manifest itself. I've seen lots of ways that's manifesting itself is, I think, one of the most important things going on in the community for me right now. And I think that's being reflected in the way that the outside world is acknowledging us. I'll tell you a little bit about what I mean. So we had another conference like this in New York that was not quite as giant and fabulous. We had maybe 60 people show up. But the thing that I noticed when 60 people showed up in New York is that the kinds of people who showed up, the diversity of people who showed up, was really different than the kind of diversity that we get online. If you look at the membership of AVEN, our median age right now is 24. We are mostly, not entirely, mostly from English-speaking countries, mostly from more economically privileged backgrounds. Even though our communities, accepting people of color, we have skewed to be a largely white movement. And when you look at the people who are showing up at conferences like this, people who show up when we convene in the real world, it's much more diverse. Much more diverse in terms of age, much more diverse in terms of race and ethnicity, much more diverse in terms of ability. We are creating a more open and accepting space, and we have a much wider range of people who are showing up. And I think that is the huge next step for our movement. And one of the reasons it's a huge next step is that it opens up a lot of conversations that we've started to have but haven't been able to have fully. It opens up conversations about asexuality and age, and asexuality and aging, that I think our community really deeply needs to have. It's helping to push forward conversations about asexuality and ability. We've had incredible research and related to that, asexuality and health services. So we've had incredible research about our community that's happened that has resulted in us being largely delisted by the American Psychiatric Association as a mental disorder. They used to have something called hypoactive sexual desire disorder, which is where you haven't been like sex enough. Now that's been revised so that we're not included. And there's a huge discussion about what happens when an asexual person walks into a therapist's office. How can we train mental health professionals to be more effective? There's some really important discussions about asexual therapists in the media. There's really important discussions about the intersection of the ACE and LGBT community, especially the trans community, because there's so many people in the ACE community who are at a wide range of places on the gender spectrum. And so I guess I'll wrap up by saying that those are all the discussions I'm really excited about. Those are the discussions that I'm excited about. I'm excited about engaging with everyone in this audience to see who is interested in having part of those discussions moving forward.
I'd like to piggyback on what David said about medical issues. One of the other medical issues that I'm really interested in is for people with vaginas to have gynecological visits. This is something that I've heard a lot of people that I've talked to on the internet, through my Facebook page or through AVEN, that people aren't necessarily getting a gynecological visit. So one of the medical conversations that I think is important for us moving forward is to talk about that kind of healthcare service for people because it's about cancer screening and has very little to do with sexual activity at all. So I think that that's one of the things that as we move forward with the health conversation is vital to us as a community to educate ourselves on.
Hey, before we open for questions, I want to kind of do a couple show of hands. How many people would be interested in being part of a conversation about asexuality and health? Asexuality, physical health, mental health. How many people would be interested in being part of a conversation about asexual representation in the media? It's like what Ivy doing. Okay, awesome. How about asexual representation in LGBTQ communities? Cool. All right.
Seems like we're hitting all the highlights there. Excellent.
So with that, and one other thing that a quick story I want to share because I'm really excited about it. I was invited to speak at an organization called Planned Parenthood in New York State.
We've been trying to get for 4 years.
We've been trying to talk to them for 4 years because they do some of the most. They're one of the biggest groups in the New York area doing comprehensive sex education, and they invited me in to speak to their entire staff of about 40 people that goes around and does sex education in schools all around the New York area. And these were people who had never really thought about asexuality before, never really understood our community. I got up during their lunch break and I talked to them. And for the first time it's ever happened in an organization, they said, wow, this is incredible. We're not talking about this, and we need to change our curriculum to include asexual discourse in sex education. And I've been beginning to have more and more discussions with people who are in the education space who are acknowledging us in large part because of the research that's been done, because of the good work that's been done. So that's another really powerful area of opportunity right now. So with that, I'd like to open up for any questions that people have.
All right, so going back to what you were saying earlier, just briefly about speaking to Planned Parenthood, as moderators of PA and Sympathy Forum, I do see a lot of young people coming onto that forum and having some serious issues coming up to their parents, facing other difficulties, just in regards to that, right? So, is there any actual foreseeable plans for further development of resources for these young people so they can make life a little easier for them?
So maybe you can help piggyback on this. So
Sure.
we've been talking with Planned Parenthood. We've also been talking with a group called the Trevor Project. They started as a LGBT youth suicide prevention hotline and have sort of expanded to be an online support group, online and phone-based support group for queer youth. And they have been really enthusiastic about educating their staff about asexuality and building safe spaces for ACEs and people who question ace identity to talk about their experience online. AVEN is clearly one, but I think building out other ones and building out other places that are local that people can go to are going to be really important. So right now we're at a place where probably most at this point, campus queer groups, which are a safe space that people use to come in person and talk about issues of identity, are learning how to be ace inclusive and ace positive. That's not yet true in high schools. And there's really powerful work that we need to mobilize around to make that true in high schools. The Gay Straight Alliance Network in California includes us in all their conferences. There's a really amazing relationship that we could be forming with LISTEN, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, but that's something that I'd love to follow up with you one-on-one about if that's something you're interested in looking at.
And to piggyback on that, the Trevor Project was the very first LGBT organization that became asexual inclusive. That happened in 2012. So we were on the leading edge of this as far as asexuality and specifically LGBT services, right? Now your question is more about asexual youth and where they should be able to find resources outside of AVEN, right?
That's that is just part of it, because like I say, it's basically what I'm trying to find is find some solution to it. It's quite common, some of the comments that some folks having in regards to parents on taking it seriously when they say, hey, well, I think I'm asexual. And then they're being rejected, that status is rejected for a wide variety of reasons. And that becomes quite a stressor.
So I think that the Trevor Project is a great place to direct them to, especially because there's the Trevor Space part of the Trevor Project that is it's essentially a social media network for LGBTQIA youth, and it is asexual, gray, inclusive. In addition to that, we have a need in the asexual community for more resources to be generated that can't be filled by the current people who are doing it, right? There's more work to be done than there are leaders going around right now. That is a function of us being a very young movement, relatively speaking, and also a function of the fact that nobody gets paid to do this. Ivy's the first one. And she got her book deal this year, late last year?
November.
Late last year. So there's nobody that gets, I have a day job, David has a day job, Julie has a day job. So there's nobody that actually does this as a full-time job. That's a problem that we'd like to resolve in the not near but medium future. If that makes sense.
And if I could piggyback.
Yeah. Let me finish this up. And then
If you can't tell, David and I have these kinds of conversations back and forth all the time.
So I think that that's part of it, is that we need to develop some more resources. I also think that part of it is that AVEN is where they're going to go. You are, as the T and Sympathy, sorry, I don't spend a lot of time on AVEN. As the T and Sympathy moderator, I think you are one of our first lines of defense for helping these youth to be able to have support. Because that's where they're going right now. In the future, that may be different, but I think that that's part of the role that you're playing in the community right now. And I think that developing leadership that can take that role on in a broader sense is one of our goals, but we only have so many resources to go around at the moment, if that makes sense.
Last quick piggyback on your piggyback. Having resources that we can direct parents to is also really important.
That's one of the things that
There is a section on that in here,
Yeah.
directed at parents of asexual people.
Yeah.
And also a teen asexual section and a young asexual section. I've written a couple of blog articles, made one coming out video, but they're they solve the issue kind of more broadly. It's not specifically for younger people necessarily, but they could be used for that. So if you don't know what they are, you can ask me and I'll tell you what they are if you want to post them somewhere or use them as like a pinned post or something.
Yeah.
And let's sync up after this and put together a quick task, like a couple people who want to build resources for AVEN too.
I also have a pamphlet on aceweek.org that's for friends, family.
Okay.
And that's a pamphlet, it's a threefold. You can print it off at home, and it's a very generic overview kind of pamphlet, frequently asked questions, that kind of stuff. Obviously, if the parent is not already at a point where they can get that asexuality might be a thing, it's not the best for that parent, but for parents who are trying to be supportive or who want to understand, the pamphlet is a good tool. Great question, thank you. Oh, so we've got 3 hands. In the green shirt, in the white shirt, and then in the beautiful bow tie.
Is parental information also for supporters and allies that aren't necessarily parents but want to understand? Or is it mostly generated toward parents?
The stuff that we have on Ace Week is generated towards friends and family.
Okay.
So that's for anyone who is looking at somebody in their life who may be asexual or who has come out as asexual. There's also a couple of other pamphlets on there that aren't necessarily friends and family pamphlets, but that would also fit that broad audience.
Yeah, I think this is Julie who wrote the Invisible Orientation. I missed the opening remarks altogether. So, you see right here. Where in some of your book did you touch on the fact that like gray asexuality or bandy asexuality, and also intersection with a non-English culture?
Yes, absolutely, yes. There's a whole section called the gray areas. And I deal with demi and gray identities, both for romantic and for sexual spectrum. So I talk about how you can be in the middle, you can be anywhere on that spectrum. And there are several sections that in the book that bring in the middle ground.
What about the other ethnicity?
Oh, there is a section for, I have a section there called Asexual People of Color. There isn't a section that's directed toward people specifically international, but it does discuss that some of these aspects of the culture are only applied to how it's manifesting in the West right now. So there's still a lot to be done on that, and there's a lot of stuff that I would have liked to talk about that I didn't feel qualified to talk about. So I mostly just acknowledged that in the English-speaking world and in the West, you're going to see these manifestations while there may be different problems and different attitudes in countries other than the ones in the West that I'm mostly talking about.
So your treatment on the Western traditional culture, is it based on the Greek culture from there?
Is it but based on what?
The Greek culture.
Greek?
Yeah, Greco-Roman.
I suppose, yeah.
Judeo-Christian.
Yeah, you could say that when we're talking broadly about the West, sorry, is that okay?
That's
Not
fine.
American
But
culture.
we're talking about broadly in the West, we're talking about both American and European, which I suppose, yes, you can trace back to Greco-Roman sort of culture, as opposed to Asian cultures, African cultures, or South American cultures, which developed their own sorts of identities prior to colonialization, and were able to sort of develop their own ways of talking about these things. For example, there's an article that was out recently about race and asexuality by a person named Alok, who David and I have met. And this article talks about the ways that sexuality intersects with his South Indian identity, and ways in which that develops differently. As somebody who's white and who grew up in America, I don't feel like I have the qualifications to build a community for people who are people of color who also may identify as asexual or somewhere on the asexual spectrum, but I do know that there are people trying to build that community. There is a thread on Avon that's a pinned thread, and there is conversation that's happening there as well. But as I was saying earlier in a group that I was sitting in the previous session, there is a lot of holes in what we are able to do as leaders in the community because of the youth, not youth as in young people, but youth as in our community is very young. And so there are things like asexuality and race and culture that haven't been addressed yet because nobody's come along and addressed them. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, and that's very interesting because that intersects with the asexuality and world religion and spirituality.
Absolutely. Absolutely, of
Way
course.
beyond Christianity.
Yes.
Absolutely. We do have data that says that very few asexuals identify as Christian. I don't know what the exact number is. I can pull it off my computer for you. In 2011, Ace Week did a survey where we surveyed 3,500 self-identified asexual people and asked them a variety of demographic questions, including religion. And the majority of them, maybe it's not the majority, but the plurality of them at least, identified as atheist. And then there was several other religions that were also identified as. That data is available on our website as well. The bow tie.
First of all, I think it's really great that you already mentioned the issue of education, and I think that it's also really great that there's more media coverage coming out about sexuality. But whenever I look at the comments in the public, the articles, the main question they seem to be asking is, what is from visibility? So I'm thinking about how is the best way to frame, I don't want to say the asexual agenda, but how to discuss issues of education, for instance, because that's one thing that the community really needs. So how best should we frame that in the context of what media are looking for?
You're looking at me. Okay.
No, I'm looking at you because I have an
You
answer
have
to this, but I want to
7
see
things
if,
you'd like to
yeah.
say? Okay, say your 7 things and I'll piggyback up for you.
Cool. Ivy, you should pick it up. there's a study that came out a little while ago by two people named McInnes and Hodgson. Were they Canadian? I think they're Canadian. And this is the first study we've ever seen on discrimination against asexual people. And what it found, it used a couple of standard methods that have been used to study discrimination in the LGBT community. And they found that among prospective landlords and among prospective employers, discrimination against asexual people was as likely as discrimination against LGBT people, lesbian, gay, and bi people, which I think was a finding that was in some ways not surprising, definitely sobering. I know that this is definitely something that I've experienced in my employment search. Like I've had job interviews where the first 5 minutes of the job interview was someone asking me about my sexuality before, and then I had to like get them out of that to talk about the job. There are, so questions of bias are ones that our community is just beginning to address. Having the first asexual characters on television means that we're getting to the point where the world might know enough about asexuality, they can start forming misconceptions about us. Unfortunately, we're doing really amazing work to stop that from happening, but it's not that we're going to be visible, the word's going to be out there, and everyone's just going to get it. And I think we know something about what those misconceptions are going to look like. If you look at, so back to the McInnes and Hodgson study, they did a kind of word association game with people where they had them associate different words, and they asked them what words they associated with asexual. And the words that came up were mechanistic and inhuman. Robotic. There was this idea that, this is moving out from the study to my personal understanding of this, having done a lot of education around asexuality. I think that there is this sense that asexual people are missing something fundamental about our humanity. That's not true, but that is a sense that exists. For many people, the concept of sex and the concept of human emotional connection are Velcro together. So if I say that I'm not interested in having sex with people, what they hear is not that there's this one narrow set of physical activities I don't like doing with people. What they hear is I am not interested in or not capable of connecting with other people or myself in a meaningful way, which is a really different thing. And I think that the part of the reason that we hear those words like robotic and inhuman being thrown around, now that we have enough visibility to see how people react, is that people, when they hear asexual, they're imagining someone who does not connect, does not know how to, does not have a desire to. And that's really, really different from what our community is. And so I think that the kind of work that we have beyond visibility, in addition to all the things that we've just been talking about, right? The mental health stuff, the broader health stuff, the education stuff, the interaction with LGBT, the stuff, the media, right? The work that we have is to unvelcro those concepts. I think that we are leading a discussion that is kind of helping the broader world realize that connection and intimacy can be things that exist without sexuality. People can form those, and we as asexual can live really amazing lives that are filled with deep connections with ourselves, deep connections with other people that don't involve sexuality. And I think that's a shift in a much broader social discussion than just a discussion about our community. But I think that that's part of what we're going to need to do to be truly accepted.
I think that Velcroing is a function of Western society,
Yes.
right? That Velcroing is a function of the ways in which we think about life in Europe and in the States and in Canada, but not necessarily a function of the way we think of the way that people who grow up in Asia or people who grow up in Africa think about life, right? And so I think that largely it's a critique of Western society. But I think back to your question, which is what do asexual people want beyond education and visibility? I'm going to give you a laundry list. I have a laundry list. Family protections. What if 3 people want to raise a baby together? How do all 3 of them have parental rights for that child, right? Employment protection, just like David. So I've been running Asexual Awareness Week for 5 years. So on my I became unemployed in 2011. I had Asexual Awareness Week on my resume to show that I was doing something with my time of being unemployed. I spent 2 years unemployed. I took Asexual Awareness Week off my resume and got a job interview the next week. So that's it's a bias that's not being stated yet, but it's clearly there, right? And now when I go for a job interview, I don't talk about any of this because otherwise I can't get a job, right? And there have been studies done about LGBT activism on your resume. And if you send 2 identical resumes, one with LGBT activism and one with not, the one with not will get the phone call. So there's that. Family protections, employment protections, healthcare. We need a broader conversation with our mental health providers, with our physical health providers about asexual healthcare. For example, I told this story earlier on when I was trying to find out about asexuality. I had a therapist, a sex therapist, a gynecologist, and my GP. Not a single one of them said the word asexuality to me. I found it on Google after I had been on hormones for a year. So there needs to be a broader conversation with medical professionals. And then on top of that, we need better media representation. We need better inclusion in LGBT spaces because, like David alluded to earlier, there are some college campuses that have this programming. I don't think it's most. I disagree, and I've talked to a lot of, it's not most. There was a person who was sitting over here during the session earlier who was telling me about how their campus doesn't have any sort of programming at all. And we hear no programming to, we had an Asexual Awareness Week once, to we have a regular group on campus, and there's a wide spectrum, right? So all of those things are things that we want beyond just, hey, we exist and we're not broken or sick. Did you want to jump in on that before? Nothing there.
What do you recommend for someone going through a job interview where the interviewer is asking uncomfortable questions about asexuality?
It's not related to the job.
It's not related to the job. So I can speak about U.S. employment law because I live in the U.S. In the U.S., they're not allowed to ask in some places. Okay, and so in Canada, no. But in some places in the U.S., they get around it by asking things about like who you live with or what your social life is like and things like that. So you have a couple of options. One, wear your ace flag, wear your ace flag proudly, right? It might cost you a job. I had to stop doing that despite how much I love the work that I do in this community. I had to stop doing that. The other option that you have is to hide it. And that's a sad option for me to have to even offer to you at this point. But unfortunately, the only place in the world that we know of that has asexuality employment protections is the state of New York. And Selby's in the back like, yeah! If you all haven't met Southpaw back there, the amazing Southpaw from New York City. Anyway, New York has it, but New York doesn't have it because we went out and advocated for it. New York has it because, believe it or not, they used it as a cover to get employment protections for homosexual and bisexual people. Because if they put asexual in there too, the Republicans would complain about it less. So, that all happened in the early 2000s before our community was really organized enough to have employment protections. Now, at this point in the game, we're in touch with the folks who are working on the Employment Non-Discrimination Act in the states, which would be a federal piece of legislation that would cover everyone. For those of you who don't know, in the United States, you can be fired for your sexual orientation in 29 states. You can be fired for your gender identity in 38 states. So this is a problem that... That's okay. So
if you are gay, lesbian, or bisexual, you can be fired in 29 states. If you are transgender or gender nonconforming in some way, you can be fired in 38 states. So here's the thing. In Iowa, you can get gay married, but you can't put the picture of you and your spouse at the wedding on your desk at work, because you can get fired. So they're trying to get the Employment Non-Discrimination Act passed in the US now. We're trying to get asexuality into this. And so we've been lobbying on that. We've been working with the Transgender Leadership Coalition, the National Center for Transgender Equality, the amazing Mara Kiesling, who we love. And we had a meeting about this with her about a year and a half ago, because Congress in the United States actually had a meeting about asexuality being in ENDA. And Mara came to us to be like, hey, they're having these meetings, you should probably go be in these meetings. So that is a process that we're working on right now, but for the moment, your options are to wear it proudly and make a complaint if something happens, or to not talk about it.
And I would say that if you feel uncomfortable disclosing your sexual orientation to anyone for any reason, you shouldn't feel like for the cause you have to. So one of the things that I recommend, especially to young people or people who live in a place that feels conservative or oppressive in some way, that you feel like your safety or your mental health is in danger before disclosing this, you can use a workaround such as, well, I've never found anyone I felt that way about, but I'm fine for now. You know, and that way you're answering the question, and you're also not saying some label. You're not using a word that they can Google or a word that they can judge you by. You're just saying, well, I've never had this experience. And people are less hostile about that for some reason. That would be my advice.
I'm not sure that, I'm in human resources for a large engineering firm, and those types of questions, at least from my perspective in Canada.
Oh, you're in Canada? Okay.
I'm in Canada, I'm in Toronto. You know, those questions, those types of questions just are not asked.
In the state of California, they're not asked either, because in California it's illegal to ask about your family situation, but that's not true in all of the U.S. states.
And I guess my point is that when you are looking for employment, do you really want to work for a company like that would ask you those types of questions and judge you? So, you know,
And in this economy, you might.
You might have to. I was not asked any questions about that, but I know that especially for people who are women and people who are perceived as women, it is more common for male employers to want to know about your work or your family situation, because they're going to use that to decide whether you're probably going to get pregnant in a couple of years, or whether you're going to be the primary caretaker of children that you already have. And it's not allowed, but they still find a way to ask, and they do judge you by it, even though it's illegal to do it. So sometimes you have to protect yourself.
Being in the closet is never fun.
No. And I'm not out at work.
Not out at work. Are you out at work?
I'm out at work.
Well, they know I
You
wrote
work
a
for a
book.
cool company.
Right.
They know I wrote a book, but they don't know what it's about. They bought me a pie. They didn't know to get pink.
Hashtag asexual problems.
I have a question. What is it, I'm sorry, this is going to come off weird, and I'm ready to put my mouth full. What is it with this organization and kink?
Wait, I guess that's on me. I'm going to tell my version of the history, and then Cole's going to come up and correct me. Here you are. Yeah. So there is this experience that a lot of people in the ace community have of finding other asexual people for the first time. That is a really powerful one. And I know it was really powerful for me. Like, I remember sort of when I first put up the website of AVEN and got my first email from another person. It was a really powerful experience. And so we'll have people who show up, and there's a nice graph of how many of them show up every day, posting for the first time and saying, here's my story, here are these things I've experienced my whole life, am I asexual? and then people started jumping into those threads and being like, we're so glad you're in this community, we can't tell you if you're asexual or not, you have to, like, if the word fits, then you use it, but my experience, like, our experiences resonate with your experience, we felt a lot of the things that you felt. And so it became such a thing to, like, jump into these threads and pile on and be like, yay, we're glad you're here. That they found a little picture of cake and they started posting cake in those threads as a way of saying, welcome, you're accepted here, we feel the things that you feel. And and so cake started as that.
It was a little emoji.
Like a little graphic of cake. And then it sort of expanded out from that to be something that appeared whenever people want to celebrate something in these communities. So now whenever we have meetings, people eat cake. It's kind of like the rainbow in the broader.
I also have data on cake versus pie. So cake won by a hair.
The reason that it's cake over every other thing was that there was a thread specifically on Haven that was asking what's better than sex. Overwhelmingly, cake won as the choice of what was better than sex. So then, because that thread happened, somebody made our cake emoji. It was created by an Avenite and published to the forum. Everybody loved it. It got voted on and approved to be added to our emoticon set. So then we added it to the emoticon set, and now it's widely used, as David said, to welcome people to the forum.
That makes a lot more sense.
May I add to that?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so.
All the mods get in on this.
And currently, and actually I just want to talk about a moderator, Lady Girl, anyways, has been to the site then in the last year or so, and has actually gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure that there are images of all sorts of cake to welcome other people. It's quite amazing. It's like transformed the new one for everybody. It's great.
There was a hand right here.
Oh, I thought, so I'm very new to the ACE community.
Welcome.
I'm actually, but I thought it was explained to me as if it was like a metaphor of how to explain sexuality to people. And it's kind of like, oh, okay, so like, I can't remember the exact analogy. It sounds weird. Have you for cake, but you don't exactly want to eat it. Or it's kind of like, oh, you can have your cake and eat it too. Or you can have all the types of cake and ice cream or something. I can't remember what it was. But that's where I thought it always came from. But clearly I'm not correct with that. But
So that's my presentation. I use cake as a way to explain to primarily straight audiences why asexuality is the way that it is, and I use cake because you can use hockey, you can use, like there's a whole bunch of different
Wait, what's hockey?
So I used cake to explain it, and so it has, and the reason I picked cake was because it has community stuff.
So it's true. Other questions?
I was going to talk more about like representation in the media and how you guys feel about that. Because like I know you said there's some characters, I guess, but like when I watch TV, I don't see any like canonical like actual ace characters. So I don't know, just what your thoughts about what it's like in the media right now.
Is all you?
Yeah.
There have been a few that were canon asexual. They tend to be, first of all, the most long-standing one was not in the U.S., I believe it was in New Zealand, soap opera called Shortland Street. And an asexual character named Gerald he's actually, I believe, biromantic, and you see him struggling in his relationships with men and with women during I can't believe or an asexual character is on a soap opera. It seems like counterintuitive, but yeah, I mean, and the portrayals are just every once in a while a little bit occasionally problematic in some way, but in general, it's pretty good. It's pretty good representation. Gerald, I'd get on board with that. In the U.S., there was a very short-lived series called Huge that had an asexual counselor named Poppy. And she just said, oh, I identify as asexual, and the way that she described it also was that she never felt romantically interested in anyone. So she didn't use the word aromantic, but apparently that was also part of her identity. And she was just a random camp counselor, and nobody tried to fix her or ask her questions or anything. It was just a little bit of a surprised reaction from her co-counselor, and then, okay, that's what we'd like to see. And I believe actually in Canada, I think it was Canada, there was a show called Godivas. It's also canceled. That had I think his name was Martin, an asexual character, but he identified as asexual. He used that word, but I think that he was fixed later with hormones, which was terrible. In mainstream media, we've also, of course, had the terrible Dr. House episode, which portrayed two. If you haven't seen it, it was Dr. House is this doctor that's a genius, and he's a pretty awful person in general. And he had his co-doctor came to him saying, I have an asexual patient. And Dr. House says, well, that's impossible, because if you don't want sex, you are dead, dying, or lying. And so he decided by the end of the episode he was going to figure out what was wrong with her and find a medical reason for her asexuality. And what ended up happening is because of the rules of the vet and whatnot, he was not allowed to test this woman. So he tested her husband, who was also asexual, and he turned out to have a pituitary tumor that was causing his lack of interest in sex. And when he was going to, I guess, agree to the surgery or something, his wife said, oh, actually, I've been lying to spare your feelings. So they cured not one but two asexual people in that episode. And the hero doctor of the episode gets to smoke his cigar and say, see, everyone wants sex unless they're dead, dying, or lying. And that's the note we end on. And the person who wrote that episode was confused about why we were upset about that. So, like, we got you a lot of traffic, come on.
Well,
yeah, you did.
Actually, the person who wrote the episode originally was going to have the house not be able to cure them.
Supposedly, yeah.
And then the editor stepped in and said that wasn't an interesting enough storyline.
Right, but you didn't have to cure both of them, right? Like, that's our point, is that if you wanted to still be respectful of our identity as something that isn't cured, then you didn't have to have the wife to say that. So, but anyway, so that was a terrible representation in media. Then you get the less the less obvious ones who just you guess that they might be asexual, or they seem not very driven by sex in the media. So we see those characters here and there.
The Doctor Who's, the Sherlocks.
The Sherlocks, the Sheldon.
Yeah.
But also, one thing that we should really be looking for also is stuff that is not on mainstream media channels like webcomics. And there's so many, there seems to be, I've seen around a dozen webcomics in just the last couple of years that have popped up with asexual characters. Some of them are main characters in the webcomics. We see them on TV shows, we see them in the webcomics. Every once in a while we see them in a book. I've actually listed a few examples in here of the books that have asexual characters that actually use the word asexual in a way that's similar to us. So other than that, like, what else did you want? You just wanted some examples of kind of how it's been handled? Yeah.
Thank you. Add a couple things to
Go
that.
ahead, yeah.
Before you add a couple of things to
Yes, go
that,
ahead.
we are coming close to the end of this session, so
Oh, we
if
are?
you have, yes, so if you, because we like to talk, if you have a burning question that you want to make sure gets asked, think about it while David's talking, because we'll have time for just one or two more questions.
I'll be super fast then. There is, you mentioned Sherlock, Doctor Who, and Sheldon. So in broader popular culture, we know that they're researching the asexual community actively when they write for those characters, because they're in interviews they're using words like aromantic to describe the characters. And so there's we're informing dialogue in the media. If you look at the the characters with the biggest reach, they all are pretty similar looking. They're all kind of on the autistic spectrum, white, male, lanky, kind of in their mid-20s. And so building a broader representation for mainstream press is really important. And the best way to do that is to tell our own stories in our own creative content and have those bubble up.
And actually, Poppy from Huge might have been based on me, I'm not sure. Because in an interview, the creator of Huge said, I got the idea from watching a girl on YouTube. And I was one of the only people who was doing it at that time. So it might have been me, but I never got an answer. Did I inspire this mainstream character? I don't know.
The blue shirt here, and then right there with your backpack on your lap.
Okay, so as you were describing our representation in media, I heard a lot of things like, not enough interesting for an episode. In a drama, why would you even be in there? So I find that's also problems when coming out or trying to explain yourself to other people because they're like, why do you need to say anything if there's nothing to say? So I find it really difficult to even just like tell friends like, hey, please don't try to put your emotions like that on me because I won't return them. I'm just giving you a heads up sort of thing. They're like, why did you even need to say that? It makes for a very awkward, I guess, atmosphere when trying to explain oneself. So I was wondering if there was any advice you had to that sort of thing?
I think that part of the misconception about asexuality, and there are many misconceptions, is that we're boring.
What do you do if you don't have sex?
Because what do you
There's
do if
nothing
you
to
don't have sex? How do you have a romantic relationship without sex? How do you have any relationship without sex? Because, and specifically as we've been talking about in Western culture, sex and intimacy are intertwined, and the penultimate desire of success is to get married and have babies, right? Or to at least get married, right? And so that monogamous, romantic, sexual relationship is the definition of success in our society. And so when people are confronted with asexuality in their world, and they have never thought of that before, they think, well, that must be such a boring experience, right? How many of you are boring people? This is my false? False. So, no. So I think that that's part of it, right? And part of that level of narrative that we are not boring people has not yet trickled into the media, into the mainstream representations of us as people. For example, I have an awesome set of complicated, amazing relationships that function in my world that all serve different purposes that are beautiful and brilliant, right? That could be a really cool story. Not me, because I don't want to be no. But some other story about it, right, could be very interesting. There's a web series that's on right now called Aces. If you Google it online, it's written by an asexual person, and it's about asexuality. So that's one place where we're getting some better representation, and some representation that's coming from us. I also think that as our median age grows, as David said earlier, it's 24 on the website right now. It's different when we get in person. As our median age grows, and as we get a more broad community, we will find writers who are asexual. We will find celebrities who are asexual. We will find all of these different sort of nuances. Like, if you can compare it to the transgender community right now, right? Now you finally have things like the transgender representation on Orange is the New Black, and the transgender representation in other television shows and things like that that are actually being played by transgender people, right? Can you imagine an asexual person playing an asexual character on a regular show? Mind blown. It hasn't happened yet, but it will, right? And that's part of what this education work that we're all doing in different ways is so crucial to sort of push that forward. So the last question I'm going to take is from you with the backpack in your lap, and then we're going to wrap up. Is lunch next?
Lunch is next, yes.
And where would you like them to go?
It's just outside here. I mean, there's definitely time for one more question because I think that nobody else has come yet. So please go for it.
Excellent, perfect.
Hi. Okay. Kind of to touch back on the other question with asexuality being portrayed in the media and whether there's asexual characters or not. That is one thing that I've not seen all that much of, but one thing I have seen a lot of is a whole lot of noise about the only valid relationships that are loving relationships are sexual relationships. And that if you don't have sex in your relationship, that means you don't love the person. That's a huge, huge hurdle, even with the appearance of asexual characters, to come up against. And is there any real way to start to try to fight that?
write more content that portrays our community and portrays our relationships in a way that is interesting, right? Because right now, the same thing that the person in front here was saying, right now, they think we're boring, right? Because the Velcroing that we've been talking about this entire session, love, sex, and intimacy all go together as one without delineating them out. That Velcroing is what's creating the mindset that our lives are so boring, why would they even cover them?
And the interesting thing I found is that when I actually sit down and name that assumption, when I actually sit down and say like, hey, average sexual person, do you think that people need to be sexual to form emotionally intimate, meaningful relationships with one another? They're like, no, I don't think that. Like they know on some level that that's not true, but so much of the dialogue that exists in our society reinforces that assumption that it just kind of slips into people's thinking. So I think if we can name it, if we can call it out, and we can start creating content about the ways it's not true, then there's something really powerful that we can create.
And that, again, takes time. And it takes the development of asexual writers like Ivy and the other writers that are writing about asexuality. She got the book deal first. But there are other people who are writing about fiction books about asexuality and asexual characters and things like that. Absolutely.
I think that actually goes more beyond something that's just asexual targeting, though. I think that just maybe somebody who's aware of asexuality or is asexual who's just writing for a mainstream audience, just so that those ideas get more out there.
And that's all work we have to do. So we still have another couple of minutes, Michael said, so in the back there.
Just on the subject of web series that have asexual characters, must be from that?
Yeah.
Just on the subject of web series, recently there was this Tumblr post going around where someone was like, imagine a show where there's a pansexual and an asexual, and the pansexual is really introverted and the asexual is really outgoing, and it's called All or Nothing. And some people actually
That describes my marriage.
and some people actually started a Kickstarter to form that to make a web series of that. Like there's some actors and stuff involved. So Google that if you're interested. I think it's a really cool idea.
It's great too. I saw that.
Is that not describing each other? That's ridiculous and awesome. I know. So now I'm gonna watch, and I'm gonna make him watch too. I hope it gets funded, right? So I guess we'll end on a funding note. We do all of this based on community donations, right? And so web series, the asexual documentary that came out a few years ago, even this conference and the ASL interpreters that we have, all of it is funded by community donations. And so at this point, like I was saying to you earlier, there's nobody paid to do this yet. That will change over time. The future is bright, is the line I want to leave you with, right? There's a lot of really good things coming. Have any of you ever read The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell? We're right there. We're right at the edge of it. And I can see it coming. I don't know if the two of you can see it. We can see it coming, where there will be, just like this year, it's sort of been a transgender tipping point in the last couple of years, where now, R. Kelly's son came out as transgender. And R. Kelly went on TV and said, don't call her my son, that's my daughter, right? And the whole media, everybody in the media was like, oh my goodness, you can't say that, right? Even 2 years ago, that would not have been the case. So they're at a tipping point right now, and they're, for lack of a better term, falling over the other side, where there will be so much support that you can't say those things anymore. That will happen to us, but it takes all of us working together, all of us pushing education forward. Asexual Awareness Weeks on your campus. It takes buying the book and getting it into the campus library, into your local libraries. It takes having organizational partnerships. It takes making sure that we have characters represented in the media, that we write stories about our own experience, that we have a list of things that we want to do, that we have these conferences everywhere that are able to connect us together as a community. Those are all the things that it will take to push us over the top. Because those are all the things that the trans community, that the LGBT community, that other communities that have come before us, those we stand on the shoulders of, those are all the things they have done. And so we're just following the same pattern
the same model. David and I have these conversations where we're like, well, what did they do? We're just going to do that. And we're going to make it a little sexy, but we're going to do that. So, which is where Asexual Awareness Week came from, right? There's a Transgender Awareness Week that happens that used to be very popular and isn't as much anymore because now they have Day of Remembrance and Day of Empowerment. Those are the two major trans events every year. But we were like, we'll just have an Awareness Week. And now we're in the 5th year of that. So it takes all of us working together. And all of us can be leaders in that way. The three of us are sitting here, but everyone in this room has the ability to be a leader to push this forward.